All right, so we came to fire up the 2021. We were planning on picking up a forklift with it tomorrow, which we might, but it acts like it's seized up. So I'm gonna try to crank it and see if it fires up. We've been driving it with the wounded CP4 for a couple weeks, actually. It's probably got 500 miles on it, but you can drive them surprisingly long when it's got a disaster prevention kit on it. So that's kind of part of what we were testing here and showing. So I'm gonna try to crank it and see if it behaves. It is pissed. So I tried to crank it a minute ago. Totally expected it to fire up like it has been this whole time, but it's grumpy right now. So I think the pump is actually seized up and it won't even let the engine crank. So we're gonna have to tear into it and see what we find. That sounds nasty. It magically freed up a little bit. Wasn't exactly expecting that, but I guess for starters, look to see if there's not a split fuel pump down here. There's no fuel in the valley. Just for fun, we'll see if it'll start one more time. If not, we'll probably have to drag it in.
Not very happy.
It is pissed. All right. Well, before we spin a crank gear or cam gear, we'll probably cut our losses, drag it in, and start to tear into it, see what we find. Oh, yeah. See if we can overheat some motors full load going up the hill.
Turning's gonna be interesting. Power steering doesn't work so good.
I'm thinking right about here would be a decent spot for it. Unless you think we can crank it hard enough to
If we do enough jockeying, we can make it.
get it back over
Yeah.
or somewhere in this stall.
Right. Stall-ish.
Grab a couple of those guys. You boys look strong and manly.
Not very.
No?
Not very.
Oh man,
This is easy.
I'm not even pushing.
Oh, I won't either.
Probably working harder with that steering wheel.
I think he is.
It's
Okay, got these.
There you go. Headlights get warm.
All right, so we got the 2021 rolled in. We went ahead and tore it most of the way down. It's about ready to pull the metering unit, the real moment of truth. The pump is definitely failed. We suspected that when it wouldn't start. It was actually locked up tight there for a while, then it would kind of break loose. So we highly suspected the pump was failed and seized up bad enough to actually keep the engine from turning. Hoping it wasn't a bearing problem, main bearing, rod bearing, that'd be a bad deal. But we went ahead and pulled the return filter, and this is good for anybody with one of these kits. This is the quick and easy check. If you suspect your pump is failing, you can pull this return filter, which is sitting right back here on the firewall. Instead of having to try to get down to the pump to see whether it's got a problem, you spin the filter off, which is easy to get to. Within a minute or so, you can have the filter off and look at the top of it to look for metal debris. It's going to be really fine, small metallic particles. So what we did, this is the filter that came off of it. We went ahead and dumped it out already. So what we did was dump it into a clean container that you can see what you're working with. And you can see here we've got a lot of really fine metallic debris, and this is just part of what's in that and what that pump would have been producing. but you can see it's really, really small, fine particles. So that just goes to show that it was the pump failing, making metal, because that's catching it back on the return side. So this also goes to show that you do need proper return side protection, that say an alternative of a metering unit or improp on the pump with a finer screen or a slightly finer screen, one is not going to catch all that small debris like that because it doesn't have enough tight micron filtration like a proper spin-on filter does. And also it's not doing anything for all the metal going back to the tank. So that's why this product works different, is it blocks the debris at the pump, but it also catches it before it goes back to the tank and protects the rest of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and climb up here, pull the metering unit out of it, and see what we're working with. So if you are doing this, say you're in a similar situation where you had a pump failure with our disaster prevention kit on it, once you are confident by pulling the filter that you have got a failure and it's making metal, you can go to pull the metering unit off the block. Try to keep the bypass block down in it, because that'll actually keep the debris trapped where it's at. What really matters is that there's not going to be any metal on the side of the metering unit or the improp itself, because that's the gatekeeper to the rest of the high side of the fuel system with the injectors and all that. But if you hold the block down while you pull the metering unit out, that'll keep the debris trapped in the bottom end of the pump. Try to sneak this guy down in there. Okay. I'll go ahead and pull these bolts. So the O-rings on that bypass block should be still sealing down in the pump itself. I'm gonna go ahead and try to wiggle it out. It's leaking some there. Depending on how tight those O-rings want to be, you might have a hard time holding it completely still down in there. Okay. All right. So that's exactly what you want to see in this particular case, is a nice clean metering unit. If you didn't have the disaster prevention kit on, this thing would be packed full of metal, just like that return filter was packed full of metal. So that's a good sign. That's what you want to see. You never want your pump to fail, but if it does, as long as the kit did its job and keeps it protected like that, then you're good to go. So also down into here, you should see good clean fuel down into the bypass block itself. But underneath of that, between the O-rings, pop that up, then depending on how it failed and for how long, you might see some debris basically between these two. So this captures between these two the debris trying to come from the bottom of the pump that's trying to come to the top, gets deadheaded right here. So there's no flow, nowhere for it to go. So depending on how the pump was failing, for how long, you may or may not see debris there. But once you pull this out, you technically can get some cross-contamination there. But at this point, the pump's screwed anyway, so it doesn't really even matter. It's all coming apart, so. All right, so we got the CP4 out of the 2021 F250 here. We're gonna go ahead and tear it down and see what we find, see how it failed. So one thing that is different on 2020 and up pumps is they actually put guided buckets in it. So there's actually little pins right here that have slots in the bucket that prevent the roller from turning 90 degrees. I guess a little CP4 background in general, just to reiterate, because there's so much confusion and a painful amount of misinformation out there. A CP4.2 is a 2-cylinder CP4. There is no CP 4.1 that was ever used on a Ford 6.7 or on an LML Duramax. They're all CP 4.2, so it's not like you had a CP 4.1 and if you put a 2015 and up pump in it, you get a CP 4.2 or a new improved latest and greatest version. The base pump design is the same on all of them. 2015 and up, they went to slightly higher displacement on the pump, but they still fail the same way. They still have the same base bottom end design. So there is no magic fix for get a certain model year and it's that much better. In 2020, they did, however, make a couple improvements. One was the guided buckets, like I mentioned, because oftentimes on the earlier generations, that roller will turn 90 degrees on the cam and then just start grinding into the cam. So they did improve that. They actually made the roller bigger diameter as well. So there are some improvements on the 2020s. It still doesn't fix everything. We still see quite a few failures on 2020 and ups, but they did try to implement some improvements. Actually, some of these same improvements they also implemented on the 2019 and 2020 Ram Cummins-based engine, and they still had lots of failures of those, but for varieties of other reasons. So anyways, on the 2020, we have to take these out first before we can get the rest of it apart. We did a very similar thing on the 2016 truck of ours that didn't have the guided buckets, but we also failed that intentionally with a bypass kit installed. If you haven't seen that video yet, you can check it out. It's titled, Is it Snake Oil? Yeah, there's a couple part series. So, but we're basically doing the same thing again now with the 2021. In that original video, half my face was paralyzed for part of that one, so it was kind of painful to watch and do, but this time we're a little better shape. So we're gonna pull the guided buckets out, see how it looks. So that, it actually broke the tip of that off, so it must have gone ahead and rotated. There should be a little, these go down into there, and there should be little tips on here that go into the buckets, protrude in to keep it from rotating. So those are inside the pump here somewhere now. Okay. So this is the whole pumping element here. They're actually a cool design from manufacturing and modular overall design. The plunger, pumping head plunger, and inlet and outlet valves, here's inlet valve, outlet valve here, is all contained right here. So the whole pumping unit is right here. And actually in this particular case, the pumping unit is just fine. So chances are this actually still functions properly. And because it had our disaster prevention kit on it, it prevented the metal debris from getting to the valves that exist up here. So chances are that portion of it actually functionally is okay. There's that broken tip that I was talking about that's supposed to go on here to keep this bucket from rotating. There's definitely a lot of metal down in there. I'll pull this other head. So these are obviously under pressure. This one here also looks pretty good and probably would function just fine. There's some damage to the spring from the broken parts, and again the broken piece of the roller or the guided tip is down in there. Normally these buckets should come out in a healthy pump. Right now they're seized in there, so we're gonna have to keep going. So we'll go to after the front flange here now. Nope. This is usually on here kind of tight, so you need to get a puller. Okay. So the front bushing is in okay shape, but it's really gritty. It's seen a lot of metal there. And the pump here has the bottom end of it is basically gone. So there should be rollers in these little bucket shoes, but they are not. You can see. So that should not be loose. Metal mud is what that is. So I'll try to get this cam out of here. It may or may not cooperate. So that roller should be perfectly round. You can see it's been skidding for quite some time. So the debris that we introduced when we poured our concoction in here likely seized up that roller in the bucket and then just started skidding, and then the cam began to wear that away until it actually got to be so D-shaped that it just fell out. I don't even see the other roller at the moment. We're gonna have to get more aggressive, bigger tools. Not sure this is gonna work, but we're gonna try it. She's coming. Sure would hate to damage this thing. All right. So it got hot enough. You can see where these bushings go here and here. It actually discolored the metal because it got hot enough. And then this is the kind of failure we typically see when these rollers seize, like that one did. If they turn 90 degrees, like on the previous generations, it'll just cut a groove. But this, you can see, is very pitted, and this basically is from skidding like this. And it starts removing metal from both the cam and the roller. So there's what's left of the other roller. And the buckets are seized up in there. We'll get no more big tools. More things you should never want to do to a fuel pump, but in the case of this one, it's no good anyways. Debatable on whether it was ever good. So much for Rhett's buff job on the nice show table. Sorry, Rhett. So these rollers, or these buckets, may or may not come out. They are seized up in the bores here, but it's not that critical. We can kind of see, we'll show in some footage what that looks like inside of there. But essentially the roller seized, skidded, and eventually wore it down far enough that they were able to come out, which then eventually got lodged between the cam and the housing and basically seized the pump up and actually seized the whole engine. Lots of metal that it was making. All that metal was trying to get to the injectors. Luckily, the bypass block, the DPK kit, was blocking it from getting to the injectors. And then also all this metal was going back out through the return and heading back to the tank, which we'll actually cut that filter apart to see what it looks like inside. This is actually, if you suspect a failure, as I'd mentioned previously, easiest thing is to spin this return side filter off and look for metal on the top of it, or pour it into something and look for metal there. We know obviously we had a failure, but we're gonna go ahead and cut this filter apart and see what's in it. This is what normally would have been in the tank and then circulating back to your electric supply pump and heading back through your other factory filters. This is why when you have a failure without one of our DPKs on it, you end up having to drop the tank, clean the tank out, lots of other stuff like that. There we go. So, top mounting plate, rubber gasket that seals the cartridge, which is actually loose from the top of the mounting plate. We'll talk about later, when you buy Chinese knockoff kits, they don't even have rubber seals like that to seal between these two, so you can actually get leakage right across the top. Okay, you can see there's quite a bit of material in here. It's so fine though that it's not going to be large chunks. Really the only large chunks is from like actual braking parts, which is not that much. When these fail, they create lots of really fine, super fine debris like that. This is why we get a lot of questions on, should we put a finer screen improper metering unit, referred to as a system saver sometimes. Should we put one of those on along with your DPK? The answer is no, that's a waste of money, because with the DPK on there, it doesn't even let any metal get to the metering unit. As you can see, all of this was trying to get to here. Our kit blocked it. So there's no point in spending money on a different one of these with a slightly finer screen on it to put stack on top of the other kit. So also, this stuff is so fine, we'll show data. We actually took data, sent it to a lab with a lot of the debris that came out of one of these kits to see what micron size it is. Much of that debris is smaller than what the factory screen or an improved tighter screen can catch. So it's still gonna get through some amount of it, at least until it plugs enough to kill the truck. Also, with just one of these, with a finer screen on it, it's not protecting anything heading back to your tank. So all you're doing is circulating a whole bunch of this nasty stuff back into your tank and back around through your system. That's why this is the best solution for actually addressing the issue. So this filter is pretty well packed full of that really, really fine metal. So anyways, it was a painful failure for this poor guy. Eventually seized up the truck, but hopefully the truck's healthy and we didn't hurt it so bad that it spun a crank gear or slipped. That's one thing I didn't mention, was actually it slipped hard enough that it sheared the roll pin off the cam, or off the pump cam gear, and then caught again. So it didn't slip the gear altogether, but it slipped it enough to shear this off. But we'll get the truck back together with a different pump and show you the results of changing just the pump only and not having to change injectors, pull tank, or anything like that, and see what the difference is. Thanks. All right, so you saw the carnage that came out of the CP4 from this 2021. Ian's got it back together now. All we did was put a different pump in it, and now it is good to go. Didn't have to go through the normal process, which is the whole point of this product, of if you have a pump failure, you got to replace injectors, rails, lines, you drop the tank, clean the tank, it's a mess. So in this case, literally just replace the pump, put a different pump in it, and it's good to go now. So it got about 700 miles of just hell and pain, which was another indicator. We kind of showed it with the other truck as well, the silver truck, and then this one, that the CP4 will last a surprisingly long period of time when it has a disaster prevention kit on it. I mentioned that before, but even from a safety perspective, really, it's not going to stall you very quickly like it would in a normal scenario, because the disaster prevention kit's protecting the injectors and protecting the top end where the valves are in the pump. So the pump will just keep going until either it wears the cam down to almost nothing, or it does like what it did in this case, where Ian flogged it for like 3 weeks of pain and misery, and eventually it got bad enough where it rolled. It wore the cams down, or not the rollers down, until they actually came out, and then they got seized and wedged in there. So in the last 13-ish miles or so was extra aggressive of pinching off lube flow, cooling flow to the bottom.
Yeah, starved to the bottom end, and eventually it just wouldn't restart.
Yep.
Pressure.
So she was hurt bad, and got hurt intentionally and more aggressively there towards the end to make sure and put it over the edge. But luckily, we're just able to replace the pump and be up and running. So we'll fire it up and pull it out of here, and you can see the effect of just a pump replacement.